So we're gonna have a little bit of fun because so far everything we've done has been sort of very practical for day-to-day flying, and we really haven't covered sort of the more advanced maneuvers, the emergency procedures, and that kind of stuff. And so steep turns are a good exercise, not just to get your hand-eye coordination going, which, for flight sim, not that important, although fun. But actually, they can be really useful tools. So you're looking at uh, mid-air collision avoidance, right? Making sure you don't hit other traffic. If you're very close to mid-air, a steep turn would be the best way to potentially get out of it. And the second use we're going to cover in a bit, which is spiral descents, which will be part two. So we're going to cover both today. And as we'll see in a second, you can descend very quickly with a steep turn using a spiral, very, very quickly. Sometimes exceeding 4,000 feet per minute or so.
Oh,
Damn.
wow.
Yeah, so they can be quite useful. But for the most part, for part one, we're just going to talk about just actually performing a level steep turn. So part one is to large turn the aircraft in level flight at bank angles over 30 degrees and roll onto specified headings. Now that second part, I'm not sure why we have to do that, but we do. It's part of the PPL theory and the PPL syllabus. So there's that. So let's discuss threat and error management. What's the threat we always encounter for every single flight?
Our
Um,
own emotion. Ground. The ground.
the ground, absolutely. What about other aircraft, right? I mean, after all this maneuver, we are taking it into account because of potentially last minute mid-air collision avoidance, yeah?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we manage that with the lookout, and really using a steep turn to avoid a midair is a very much a last second resorts sort of thing. Like we should never be in a situation where we need to use a steep turn to get out of a collision. But sometimes, it might happen. So we're gonna be under a very high workload. As you'll see, doing a steep turn is not as easy as doing a normal 30-degree bank turn. The workload becomes much, much higher, because we're going to have to do a couple of extra things. It's going to be a lot more focus on flying the aircraft, and it's very easy to become fixated on the instruments, which is very difficult not to do. So, aviate, navigate, communicate, make sure we focus on the flying, and what I didn't put in there, lie, lookout, attitude, instruments. Yeah, that we should always be doing that. We could stall. Um, Doing steep turns, we are using much higher lift values and thus higher angle of attacks. So we are going to be much closer to the stall than we would in a normal turn. And that's despite the fact that we are flying at a considerably higher speed than the sort of stalls you'd be familiar with when we're practicing stalls in straight and level flight. How do we manage that, Martian?
Mm.
If we accidentally stall, what are we going to do?
Pitch down and try to recover, and
Yeah.
wings level most of all.
Yeah, so first of all, pitch down and recover, right? The wings level, if we are in a turn and we stall, we don't touch the ailerons. So we
Oh,
do a
okay.
yeah, so standard stall recovery procedure. So remember
I,
we discussed,
I no, I was missing for that one, unfortunately.
oh, fair enough. So the important thing to remember is never to use ailerons in a stall. But you're
Okay.
absolutely right. Pitching down is the main thing, right? If you pitch down, you're reducing the angle of attack and you've recovered from the stall. And so then anything else afterwards is just bonus. So the main thing is if you use ailerons in a stall, you may enter a spin.
Okay.
So we always keep the ailerons in neutral. So standard stall recovery procedure. If we hear the stall horn, ailerons neutral, push the nose down, full power, and then climb out again, and then bank the wings level. Only at
Okay.
that point, right? Only once you've recovered from the stall.
Huh.
Okay, so very important. You leave the ailerons neutral at that point. Okay, so today we're going to go out, we're going to fly in the local flying area, depart, and then we're going to make sure we're not around any other traffic. We're going to perform the turns, making sure that we're keeping our lie in check, checking the lookout attitude instruments, and then once we've performed that, we're good to go. And we're going to keep aware of the fact we've got a high workload, And if that's necessary, we'll ease off a bit on the workload, get back our situational awareness, and then continue with the exercise. Okay, so lookout. It's becoming a theme, right? To enter a turn, it's just like a normal 30-degree bank turn, where you start with a lookout. From the opposite direction of the turn, across the horizon above and below 30 degrees chunks, off to the left wing, slightly behind. We've completed our turn, and then just like in a normal turn, we do the triple B. Does anybody remember what the triple B is to enter a turn? It's been a while.
Yeah.
Balance.
Sorry?
Balance.
Balance is one of them.
Back pressure, I think.
Yeah, that's another one. So what's the first one?
Bank angle. I
Yeah,
think.
bank, balance, back pressure. So we select the bank angle, we make sure we stay balanced as we do that, and then we slowly add that back pressure to maintain level flight. Once we're passing the 30 degrees bank angle, we're going to add a little bit of power. How much? Enough so that we can hear the engine noise changing, right? So that'll add about 200 RPM or so, roughly, depending on the engine type. So add a little bit of power, just enough to hear the power change. And then we're going to maintain 45 degrees angle of bank. So we're going to perform our turn at a 45 degrees angle of bank. And we're going to need quite a bit more back pressure than we would in a normal turn. And of course, maintaining balance. In this case, balance will be, I'm hesitant because with MSFS, it's not that significant. But when you're flying in a real aircraft, keeping the ball in the middle is going to be a little bit more challenging in a steep turn because you're going to need a little bit more rudder than what you're used to using when you're turning an aircraft in normal flights. So while we're turning, we lie. We're used to this. Lookout, attitude, instruments. So we're looking out for traffic. We're making sure the attitude is the same, so the angle between the coaming and the horizon stays the same, and that we've got the same height above the horizon, above or below the horizon. And then we check the instruments, make sure we're at 45 degrees, and we make sure that we are not descending or climbing, and we're making sure that we're getting close to our heading or how far away we're from our heading. Although the best way to do this in VFR is visually looking for that reference point that we've picked before we start the turn.
Okay.
Okay. If you try to go by the heading indicator, it's going to be a lot harder to turn on to the correct heading. So another thing, in the real aircraft, remaining balanced will be easier because you can feel it on your butt cheeks. You can feel if you're balanced. One butt cheek will be heavier than the other if you're unbalanced. You can't do that in sim, so we're going to have to check the ball every now and again. Usually though, if you find the correct bank angle, the correct pitch, you just squeeze enough on the rudder to get the right amount to get the ball in the middle. You could just maintain the same pressure on the pedal the whole way through, and you won't need to check it again. We will need a higher pitch angle than usual, right? So let's have a look at Excalibur for a second. Here are our wings on a 45-degree turn, and here's the lift vector. And here's the weight vector. Okay, we are attempting to maintain level flight, right? So we don't want to descend or climb. So if we have lift here, weight here, and then we break down the vectors of lift. Does that make sense to the both of you so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you got lift vertical, and then we've got lift horizontal. If we want the aircraft to maintain level flight, this will have to be equals to this. Does that compute?
Sure.
Yes.
So lift is going to have to be greater than weight. But not only that, the steeper the turn, the more that angle increases, right? this angle here. So the more that angle increases, the bigger this force has to be so that this equals to weight. Correct?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. So when we're in a steep turn, this is going to be quite a steep angle. In fact, 45 degrees is halfway to 90, which is steep. So we're going to need a significant amount of additional force. Of weight, of a lift. So when we talk about the lift curve, coefficient of lift on this one, and then we've got the angle of attack, and then we have that curve. Where are we going to be compared to, say, if this were the amount of lift required for a 30-degree bank angle of attack, right? So if
We're gonna
this is,
be,
yeah,
oh, sorry. We're gonna
no,
just
go
be
for it.
closer to we're gonna be closer to the top of the curve without going over it.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to be
Ideally.
really, yeah, absolutely. Ideally, that's correct. Both of you is absolutely spot on, right? We're going to be much closer. So if I call this the 45, so yeah, we're going to be much closer. And so this is why we really need to monitor our airspeed. Okay. So there's something called load factor. So load factor is the lift produced divided by the weight of the aircraft. Can anybody else tell me what this is known as? More colloquially, think about fighter pilots and stuff.
The G-force.
Yeah, G-force. We could do some calculations, or I could Google it. And here you'll have an answer, which is this formula right here. And so you're going to experience 1.4 Gs. So in a 45-degree bank angle, we're experiencing approximately 1.4 Gs. You will feel that in the aircraft. You're gonna feel yourself sink into the seat. It's gonna be harder to lift your head. And you do feel like it's a lot harder to scan the lookout attitude instruments. So it's really important to really remember to do that. What's the good news for us on Flight Simulator? It's
We
that,
are experiencing 1G almost all the time.
yeah, we're not going to experience 1.4 Gs. Yeah, we're experiencing 1G. If we're not
That
experiencing
would
1G,
be cool. That would be a fancy simulator.
I know, right? If we do experience something other than 1G on 1G in the sim, something's gone seriously wrong. If we were to do, and we might do that eventually, if we do a 60-degree bank angle, I don't need to do the search for that. Does anybody know what the G-force would be for a 60-degree bank angle?
Two?
It's going to be 2 Gs.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? Because 45 degrees, 60 degrees, only 15 degrees difference. You wouldn't think it'd be that much of a difference, but actually 2 Gs different. It's almost 0.6. So another 50%, right? And it is, you do really feel it in the aircraft, but we don't have to experience that. All right, so then we're going to recover, and it's the same thing, we're just going to do the reverse. We're going to bank balance back pressure. Remember to reduce the back pressure, which will be quite significant as you're recovering from the turn. And when you're past the 30-degree bank angle, reduce the power. How much by? Enough so you can hear the change in the engine sound. We might have to correct for climbing or descending throughout the steep turn. So I'm just going to put these up on the screen. So if you realize you're descending and you're at a 45-degree bank angle or more, reduce the bank angle, then raise the nose. If you try to pull your way through it, like you would in a normal turn, you're going to go through a lot more than 1.4 Gs, and we're at risk of stalling because we're going to go ahead and increase the angle of attack quite dramatically. So reduce the bank angle and pitch up. As I just realized I got a typo there, I wrote raise the nose attitude again on the second one. It should really be lower the nose attitude, right? There you go. If you notice that you're climbing in a steep turn, reduce the bank angle again and then lower the nose. And then once you've corrected it, go back into the steep turn. It'll just make your life a bit easier in terms of managing the turn and correcting it, okay? So don't feel like you have to maintain the bank angle. If you see yourself deviating, reduce slightly, correct, and then go back into the turn. We might have an issue of the airspeed being too low. We start by fixing that by increasing the power. And if that doesn't work, repeat the instructions above. Reduce the bank angle, lower or raise the nose, and then go back to what you need to do. Okay?
I feel like in the Venn diagram of this course and like a gym, that could be on the wall of both of them. Like
Power
that's
plus
a very
attitude equals
motivational
performance.
thing.
Absolutely. We should do an aviation themed gym.
Well, that would be fun. Reduce
Yeah.
bank angle.
I feel like all of this is like starts with just like, oh, we're too far, reduce it, go back, and then try
Yeah,
it again.
that's exactly it, you know. Now, the amount you reduce the bank angle will depend how much correction do you need. Sometimes you only need to correct it by about 5 degrees or so, right? Sometimes you need a little bit more. So remember that when correcting, check bank angle before you check the pitch. This is the main thing. The biggest threat here is going to be load factor or G-forces, right? Go for bank angle first and then adjust the pitch. It just means that you're at lower risk of overstressing the aircraft if that's an issue, or stalling. So that covers part one. So what we're going to do, we're going to go out there, we're going to do our threat and error management skills, and we'll practice steep turns in both directions. We'll do it a few times. I'll demonstrate it once or twice, and then I'll watch you do it once or twice. And I just want you to keep practicing them just for a little bit, just until you get more comfortable with them. And then we'll move on to part two. And part two will be the fun stuff. This is going to be really fun as well. But I think it's part two is the more fun bit. So threat and error management, we've got the traffic. A hazel wouldn't be misplaced here. We're not going to do it today, but if you're in the real aircraft, do your checks. Really important. Height, like height, airframe, security, engines, lookout, and location. Sorry, location lookout. Right, make sure you've got that all set out. We are going to get ourselves into a situation where we might be at high airspeeds because the objective here is to do an emergency descent. So we're going to go, and also to recover from unusual altitudes, although I'm not sure how to simulate that without having control of your airplanes. So high airspeeds are a threat, so just smooth inputs. Remember to smooth inputs, let's not overstress the aircraft. And then of course we've got the stall, which is the same recovery process. We do speed checks and we use the standard stall recovery procedure if we hear the stall horn.
I have
Right.
a tangential question, just real quick on this.
Yeah.
When you teach stall recovery, do you ever teach it with full like, is it always in a clean configuration, or do you teach it with full
No.
flaps?
No. Did we do it? I mean, were you there when we did stalls? No, I forget.
I was, but I
Yeah.
couldn't remember because I I was doing I was practicing, and
Yeah.
I had it in full flaps, and I was realizing that like because I was full power climbing in a way I never would, like really giving myself the business, and then I would stall and go into the recovery. But sometimes when I'd go into recovery, I would go past the VFE speed,
Yeah.
and Flight Simulator would be like, "Well, your aircraft is completely destroyed, and you're a terrible person." And I was like,
Oh
"Okay."
dear.
And so I was just wondering, like,
Yes.
is it
So when we did it, and is the way we did it on Nosedive Club is how you would do it in real flight training in the UK, anyways. Which is the first lesson for stalls. You just do standard stall recovery. So clean configuration, straight and level, stall, recover. But then the second lesson, which we combined all in one, and that might be why you don't remember it because it's just too much at once, is we do the three configurations that we care about in the circuit. So we do descending with one set of flaps, then a descending turn with two set of flaps,
okay?
and then descending with full flaps and level, but straight,
Okay, gotcha.
which which simulates the end of the base leg, turning base to final, and the final. Right. So
that explains part of it. I was doing stalls into turns, which is so I would basically like spin down, and also I think MSFS has like the spin tendency where you stall and spin at the same time.
So the issue with MSFS is that it has basically the spin is not a simulation, it's an animation. You've taught me this, Noel, the difference between simulations and
Ah,
animations. So the
Oh,
spin is a pre-coded behavior,
huh.
and that means that if you trigger the spin animation, there's no way to stop it from happening.
oh,
Gotcha.
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
which is not realistic at all. The only way you can stop it from happening is just by pushing the nose all the way down, which is not entirely accurate. I could, like in the real aircraft, I can keep the yoke into my stomach and stop it from spinning using rudder, as long as I don't
Ah,
use ailerons.
huh.
And I can get down, like I would do that as an exercise for students who were using aileron during stall recovery, which is I would stall the aircraft and they would stop the aircraft from spinning using rudder pedals.
Gotcha.
And I could do that sort of from 5,000 feet all the way down to 3,000, 2,000 feet, and the aircraft wouldn't spin, and it would just stay in the stall. Right, nose would go up and down, the stall horn would be going off at all times. But in any case, from the standard stall recovery, remember that we recover at the stall horn, so you really shouldn't get to that point yet.
Okay.
You
Okay.
really shouldn't get to the point where you're activating the animation because the aircraft stall horn goes off 5 to 10 knots before the actual stall, even in flight sim. So as long as you don't use any ailerons input and you use correct um, inputs, you just ailerons neutral, control column centrally forwards, that will recover from the stall. And remember, we're not pushing the nose down, we're releasing the back pressure. If you push the nose down, you'll get the nose attitude down about 45, 50 degrees below the horizon, and that's how you overspeed the flaps.
There we go. That makes sense.
So
Okay.
how much do you release the back pressure? Enough to silence the stall horn.
Good to know.
Okay, perfect. Good question. All right, so emergency.
Where do you
Sorry,
want us? Just
sorry.
where do you want us in the simulator?
Where do I don't know yet. We could probably pick that in a second. I'm actually on my MacBook right now, so what's going to happen is once I finish the brief, we'll take a break, and then that'll give me time to start up my sim. If either of you have any suggestions, then please fire away. I'm happy to take any. We don't have to do that now. We can decide
Okay.
in later. Okay,
Sounds good.
emergency descent. So when might I need an emergency descent?
When you're on fire.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's that's the main one. Fire. Right, a fire in a general aviation aircraft is a serious, serious hazard and should not be underestimated by any stretch of the imagination. I wish I could remember where that ASA course was, the specific one I'm thinking about, because it happened in Phoenix, and both the instructor and the student pilot were fine, but they had a fire shortly after takeoff, and so they just landed. You know, it's Phoenix; you can land anywhere. Um, And so they landed, I think about 5 minutes after they noticed the smoke. And by the time they were getting out, the aircraft was almost completely engulfed in flames.
Oh, wow.
You know, and they were in the air for less than 5 minutes. Um, and and they barely got out. You know, they like the instructors suffered some pretty severe burns. Um, because aircraft are just they're just really flammable. You know, so and not only that, it's a bunch of really toxic fumes. So even the fumes can get you. So it's really important to memorize the fire emergency procedures, absolutely. But really, I would memorize the first few critical items and get out of the sky as quickly as possible. Sometimes that's not an option, which is when you need to do the full procedure, right? But the best way to descend is a spiral descent, which is something you can get into accidentally, but it's also something you can cause on purpose and control, and that can be used to your advantage. Um, and that is by far the quickest way to get out of the sky. So, power idle, carb heat on if we have carburetor engines. Today we're flying the 172, no carb heat necessary. We start the turn, lower the pitch angle, attain 60 degrees bank angle, and we start the descent. First of all, controlling airspeed will be really difficult. We're going to have a really low nose attitude. Make sure to keep the airspeed below VNE. And if you use 60-degree bank angle, sorry, go ahead.
What's VNE exactly?
What's VNE? No?
Never exceed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't do it.
It's the red line on the airspeed indicator. It's the maximum speed you should fly the aircraft at.
Okay.
Yeah. So how are we going to control that speed? Well, it would be really tempting to just pull on the stick, wouldn't it? But we are going to be at risk of stalling the aircraft, certainly. We're going to be at very high speeds. The main concern is we're probably going to be in the cautionary range of the airspeed indicator, the orange zone. So we could potentially overstress the aircraft. So if the aircraft gets too fast, we reduce the bank angle a little bit and then pull up a little bit, let the aircraft slow down, and then go back into the steep turn. Keep that back pressure and slowly increase the bank angle to 60. And we're going to control the airspeed with pitch, but remember, bank angle first. So we're going to practice that a couple of times. Maybe I'll demonstrate one, have you practice, and then we'll just land on a field anywhere, and then we can just flew back up and practice again. Okay, the advantage of flight sims. Let's use it.
Real quick, so when you put the power to idle for the descent, what if you're on fire, like when you turn everything off? Good
question. Most likely, yes. I would, anyways.
Okay.
But what kind of fires could you have? You could have an engine fire. You could have an electrical fire as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So we can discuss the procedure of dealing with an electrical fire, because if I have an electrical fire, I'm not just going to stick the nose down.
Because air?
Well, it's more that you might actually be able to isolate it, right? So the first thing I would do with an electrical fire is turn the master switch off. Because if you don't have any power and the fire hasn't started propagating yet, then turning that off would hopefully extinguish it, right? Especially if it's just some smoke, something starting to smoke. Maybe there's a short or something. And then each aircraft has its procedure, but the generic procedure is turn the master switch off, put all the electric items in the off position, wait a few minutes, wait a minute, see if the smoke has dissipated. If it hasn't, you know you've got a fire, get out of there as quickly as you can, emergency descent. If the smoke has stopped, give it a minute, turn the master switch back on, see if the smoke comes back. If the smoke comes back, you know it's the master switch. Then you can turn off the master switch, know you don't have any electric power, and you can just land without power, right? And you can go and you can find an airport and make a safe landing.
Gotcha.
As opposed to forcing yourself into doing an emergency landing. Whereas if you turn the master switch on, nothing happens, then you can play around and you can see, okay, what's the next thing I need? Probably need to declare an emergency. So I'm going to turn on my avionics so I can talk on the radio. Right? Turn on the avionics. Has that started a fire? No? Good. I can talk on the radio. Yes? Let's turn it off. We're just going to be flying without any avionics. And then you can test it that way. This is a generic procedure.
Okay.
The main procedure is in the POH. That's the one you should memorize and use.
Gotcha.
Okay, but this is a good way to sort of deal with the fire. And this is something that really we haven't covered in these nosedive clubs, which is emergency procedures, which is something you would have covered way before this lesson at this point. Okay, after we practice emergency descents, we can discuss now unusual attitude recoveries. But it's, again, normally the way I would do it with a student in the aircraft is I would take controls, I'd ask them to close their eyes, I'd put them in an unusual attitude, and then ask them to recover. So then have them open their eyes, take controls, recover the aircraft.
We could do that. We have the my controls thing.
Yeah, so I can do that with you, Martian. I can't do that with Null, unfortunately, because
I'll
I'll get
do
my
the other stuff first.
Null's
I'll get my dog
weekend.
to pilot. My dog will take control.
Did you see that documentary where they taught a dog to fly an aircraft? That was quite interesting.
No, I didn't, but I now have a new mission in life, and I'll be back shortly.
Who did
No,
they?
not.
What was it about?
It's a documentary where they taught a dog to fly an airplane.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean,
Wow.
they only taught it to fly like a pattern in the sky, but the dog flew the airplane.
You know, I gotta tell you, if I don't pass my written exam, I'm gonna come home and be like, a dog is smarter. Man, okay, a dog is smarter than me. Fantastic.
I
This is
think it was
exactly what I
on.
need.
I think it was on Channel 4, wasn't it? Or BBC, something like that. They did that in the UK, anyways. Very interesting series. Okay, so unusual attitude recoveries. The first thing we need to do, once we realize that we are in an unusual attitude, is to figure out which of the two categories we're in. High attitude, low attitude. Both come with their own risks. What are the risks? It's not a trick question. What's
Stall.
the risk? Yeah, stall. So which one would that be, for the high or the low attitude?
High.
Yeah, we're most likely we're close to the critical angle attack. What about low attitude? What might be a risk from that? What's the threat?
Ground.
Ground is certainly a threat, absolutely. But more
Oh,
directly in terms of flight,
overspeed.
overspeed. Exactly correct. Yeah, we could overspeed the airframe. So, first thing we're going to do from a high altitude, we need to lower the nose to the horizon because the main concern with a recovery from high altitude is going to be stall, as you correctly pointed out. So, we lower the nose to the horizon. Okay? And then we increase power if we need. We keep the aircraft in balance so that we don't spin. And finally, only then, we roll the wings level.
Okay.
Okay? So the main thing is the first point that you do first. Lower the nose to the horizon, ensure you're not stalled, and then roll the wings level. That's all what these other two steps are doing. You're not stalled, roll the wings level. Keep balance the whole time. Unfortunately, it's the complete opposite for low attitude recovery. So you open your eyes, or you come out of the clouds because you flew VFR into IMC, and you pop out from under the clouds, and you're at 75-degree bank angle with a nose almost directly towards the ground. It's really tempting to just pull on the stick. What's the issue with doing that?
What
You're
we
just
talked
gonna
about.
spin fast.
Sorry?
Sorry.
Martian, go.
You're just gonna spin faster, right?
Potentially, if you're spinning, but remember, a spiral isn't a spin. So you could potentially not be in a spin.
Can you briefly explain the difference?
Yes, I can. So in a spiral, it's a controlled descent, right? Or uncontrolled, but we're still in flight. The wings are producing lift, enough lift to fly. I am not stalled. The stallboard will not go off in a spiral. A
Okay.
spiral, you've got descending very quickly, but you've got these sort of very distinct circular pattern with a very high airspeed, right? Relatively high bank angle and high rate of descent. A spin is when one wing stalls more than the other. So in a spin, it's more like a helix sort of shape. So you're going down like this, and the nose of the aircraft is always pointing towards the center of that helix.
Okay.
Okay? You're going to have a very high rate of turn. You're talking about 150 degrees per second. So, one full turn every 2.5 seconds, roughly. You're going to have a very, very low attitude talking approximately 50 degrees below the horizon, and your airspeed is going to be low and fluctuating, but it's going to remain relatively constant. Your
Okay.
airspeed is going to be close to the stall speed, so it's not going to be at a high airspeed. Whereas in a spiral, you're going to be at a very high airspeed. In a spiral, the aircraft is still flying. In a spin, it's not.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm.
Okay. So in this situation, what I'm talking about is not this. I'm talking about this. Okay?
Okay.
So we are in potential in a spiral. So you might have 50 degrees below the horizon and, oops, 50 degrees below the horizon and then low nose attitude. You're going to be at a very high speed. Think about that. Very high speed, high bank angle. Think about load factor. I pull on the yoke. When am I
Mm.
going to increase a lot?
We're basically creating the problem we addressed in the first series of slides, right? Like we're in a very, very, very steep turn, so we're just going to exacerbate the stall problem or the
Yeah,
asymmetrical stall problem.
yeah, that's absolutely one of the concerns. You would very likely enter a stall, even if you're at high speed, which is absolutely a problem. The issue is you'd probably overstress the aircraft in the process. If you got the nose down steep turn, you're probably going very close to VNE, an area like a speed range at which you should be using very smooth inputs. And then if you pull on the elevator, you're going to exceed sort of 5Gs very quickly. And you could damage the aircraft. And that's not what you want to do when you're in an airplane. You don't want to damage it. It's keeping you alive. I think we can all agree on that. So the main concern from low altitude is load factor. It's G-forces, right? If you use smooth inputs and you speed check, you won't stall. So really the main concern is not overstressing the aircraft. So the first thing we do is we close the throttle, not to exacerbate the issue of the speed. The second thing we do, we roll the wings level to minimize the load. As we roll the wings level with these high speeds, there's a very good chance the aircraft will start coming out from the dive by itself. You still need to assist it, and very importantly, you do this before pitch because of the reasons we discussed. We pitch up smoothly, assist it pitching up, just make sure it doesn't exceed VNE. And we make sure that we stay balanced throughout this situation, and again, we'll resume straight and level flight. Do we need a recap?
Maybe just show the steep turn slide again as we're doing that first.
Yeah, absolutely. I will show the steep turn slide before we, but just sorry on this particular issue, the unusual attitude recovery.
I just want to fill in my note here. When on emergency descent with the carb heat, that's carb heat in or out?
In if you have it, right? Sorry, as in on, sorry, out.
Carb
So
heat, so
on.
carb heat pulled. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So we're doing this because we're practicing the exercise, and if you're in the real aircraft, you got power idle, you want the carb heat on, right? We're
Gotcha.
simulating an emergency. We don't want to end up in a real one by getting ice or anything. Okay. So here's the thing: if stall symptoms are experienced, follow the standard stall recovery procedure, and recover straight and level flight or a straight descent, ensuring that the airspeed does not exceed VNE. And the important thing is, it doesn't matter which bank angle you're at. If you stall, lower the nose, stop the stall horn from going off, recover from the descent, and then turn the wings level. Okay? Forget about ailerons during a stall recovery. Keep the ailerons central. Control column centrally forwards. Always centrally forwards. This is the most important part.
I feel like intuitively this is the The hardest part.
It's super hard. It's really hard not to use ailerons when you stall in a bank. It's one of the things that we really like. It has to be drilled over and over again with students because it's just you want to fly the aircraft straight, right? This is
Yeah.
you want to lower your workload. You do that by flying the aircraft straight, but it's important. Pitch, angle of attack. That's what matters the most. Okay. So, quick revision of what we'll do. We're going to start with advanced turns, steep turns. We're going to do our lookout. We're going to do the triple B. We enter the turn. After 30 degrees, we increase power enough to hear the engine. We go to 45. We maintain level flight as we turn at 45 degrees bank angle, keeping the ball in the middle. As we turn, we look out, we attitude, we instrument. We realize that we're going to be using a lot higher pitch angle than you're used to in a normal turn. When we recover, again with look at attitude instruments, we're going to recover from the turn, 30 degrees bank angle, reduce power just enough so we can hear it. We continue recovering, reducing that back pressure so we don't start climbing, and we recover. If in the middle of the turn we realize that we're descending, we reduce the bank angle, pitch up, increase the bank angle again. If we realize that we're climbing, we reduce the bank angle, reduce the attitude, the pitch, and then increase the bank angle again. If we realize that airspeed's too low, first thing we do is increase power. If we're still the airspeed's too low, then lower the nose. If that causes a descent, shallow the turn. Afterwards, we're going to practice advanced turns, which is going to be performing an emergency descent. This is what I'd like us to see. So emergency descent, power idle, 60-degree bank angle, lower the pitch to maintain a high airspeed, not above VNE. We can use a little bit of back pressure if we need to maintain below VNE. But if you see that the speed trend is really high and we're going to blow VNE, reduce the bank angle, bring up the nose attitude to slow down, and then once you've got that in, maintain the back pressure and we'd go back into a 60-degree bank angle. If it's practical, we'll practice unusual attitude recoveries. High attitude is nose then roll. Low attitude is roll then nose. Okay? And that will take a while to get used to, and that's okay. We can take our time to practice these as necessary. And throughout these exercises, if we hear the stall horn, we perform the standard stall recovery procedure.